Hilchos Pesulei Hamukdashin Perek Sheni, the laws of consecrated entities that become disqualified, chapter 2. It's a bit of a, tough set of laws to learn because so much time is spent on the negative. Basically all the potential ways that sacrificial service doesn't work out. That's basically what we're up to. Before the Rambam even defines what to do with disqualified sacrifices, which is basically the goal of these laws, he first has to spend a whole bunch of chapters talking about all the potential ways that a sacrifice could become disqualified. So we're really learning more of a heavy part of Jewish law, all the possible ways to mess up in the Holy Temple. Yesterday it was mostly focused on shchita, the laws relating to slaughtering, when slaughtering could go bad, even though at the end we did talk a little bit about Kabbalah, receiving the blood, and hoilacha, walking it to the Mizbeach. Today we're going to focus on the last integral stage in sacrificial service, which is zrika, sprinkling of the blood. At the end of the day, every blood from every sacrifice had to be applied to the holy altar in some form or another. Some of them were applied to the outer altar, some of them were applied to the inner altar inside the temple structure. Within the altars themselves, sometimes the blood was poured, like in a gentle way, sometimes it was thrown or splashed, zrika. And today we're going to be talking about all the laws that relate to messed up or mistakes or errors in zrika. At the end, we're also going to touch things not related to blood directly, other things that are poured on the mizbeach like wine, but for the most part, the majority of the chapter is about the sprinkling of the blood and all the potential mix-ups that could happen and what to do about that. So the Rambam begins with applications of blood to the outer altar. When we talk about applications of blood to the outer altar, we basically have three categories. We have the korban chatas, the sin offering, whose blood has to be applied on all four corners of the mizbeach at the top by hand. Then we have classic offerings, the burnt offerings, the peace offerings, the guilt offerings, whose blood was splashed or cast onto the mizbeach, 2 out of the 4 corners at a diagonal, so you covered all 4 corners with the splash, but it was just on 2 corners. And then we have certain sacrifices like the firstborn sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice, that the blood was just poured, shvicha. So just good to know all about that going into it, where some of the bloods were applied once, some of them were applied twice, some of them were applied or meant to be applied 4 times. It says that Rambam kol adamim hanitanin al mizbeach hachitzon, all bloods that are meant to be applied to the outer altar. Im nasan matana achas bilvad kiper. If you only applied it once, you've achieved atonement. Va'afilu b'chatas, even if we're talking about a sin offering, where it has to be applied according to the Torah on all 4 corners. Matana achas hiya ikar, ushara arba matanes lemitzvah. It's only one application, which is the mainstay, and the other 4 applications are just for the optimum mitzvah. How do we know this? Shenamar, as it says, V'dam zevachecha yishafech al mizbach Hashem alekecha. This is a general verse talking about offering all sacrifices in the temple, and it says you perform the burnt offerings on Hashem's altar, and you should spill the blood of your sacrifices on the mizbeach. It's a very general verse, and it applies to all sacrifices, which makes it sound like all that's important is that at least once the blood be spilled on the mizbeach. Yes, in each sacrifice in context we get special instructions. This one do 2, this one do 4. But in this general verse we see it's just one general spilling. That's all that matters. That's integral. Shvichas hadam al hamizbeach hiya ikar. The spilling of the blood on the altar is the main thing. You spilled it once, you're good. Similarly, says the Rambam, v'chol hanitanin bizrika shenesanan b'shvicha, bloods that were supposed to be cast in a splashy way, that you just poured them in a gentle way, yatsa, you also fulfilled your obligation. Shenemar, as it says, v'dam zevachecha yishafech, same verse, the blood of your sacrifices should be spilled. This is a very interesting Rambam. I'm not going to get into the big details of it. The Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud at the end of Tractate Pesachim, seems to make this not a universal agreed upon law. There may be an argument about this law. Some people might hold that if you poured something which is supposed to be sprinkled, it's not a good sprinkling. The Rambam seems to rule like the Jerusalem Talmud, and there's considerable discussion as to why that is, but that's how the Rambam rules. Based on this verse, one application in a way of spilling, yishafech, is the main thing. Now that's all for the bloods that are applied to the outer altar. On the other hand, says the Rambam Halacha Gimel, the bloods that are supposed to be applied on the inner altar. The inner altar's blood, this is the inner altar inside the temple structure. Certain chatas, certain sin offerings had to be applied inside. On Yom Kippur, some of the offerings were applied inside. Here, everything is integral. Im chiser achas mehen loy kiper. If you missed even one of them, you haven't achieved atonement. Elakulan hinikar kapara. All of them are the mainstay of the atonement. Shari akasuv hikbid al minyanon, because the Torah was particular about their number, and it says shenemar sheva pa'amim. It says 7 times. Actually, the word sheva pa'amim appears 4 different times in the Torah. These 2 verses here are talking about Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol needs to sprinkle the blood 7 times. These 2 verses here are talking about other sacrifices that are not so much necessarily applied on the altar, but are applied inside the temple structure on the paroiches, on the curtain in between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. But there too the Torah says the word 7 times. Since the Torah was particular each time to say the full number 7 times, we learn that all 7 times are equally important, and if you missed one, you missed them all. Halacha dalid chatos shenasan mimenu matana achas umesu abaylim. Let's consider a case that could result from this concept. You have a korban chatas, okay? The korban chatas, the sin offering, is supposed to be applied on all 4 corners. The Kohen only had a chance to apply it to one corner, and the owner who brought the sacrifice died. Since the one application already achieved the atonement, yashlim arba matanes la'achar amisa, the Kohen should complete the other 4 applications after death. Because the main atonement was already achieved, so finish it. If you hadn't even done any of them, and the person would have dropped dead, so no kapara was achieved, so don't do anything further. But if you did one, finish them all. If you only applied one application by day, that's not a license to apply the rest by night. As we saw at the end of last chapter, once the sun sets on blood of a sacrifice, it can no longer be brought. It's disqualified. So you put one by day, yes, you've achieved the atonement, but don't continue putting the rest on by night. Night is not a time for applying blood to the altar. Here's another law related to this, kind of the other way. If you applied one application of the blood to the altar inside, and you finished them off outside, at an altar built outside the temple premises, chayav mishum ma'ila b'chutz, even though the last 3 aren't integral or the mainstay to the atonement, but they're still considered applications in this sacrificial sense, such that if you would do so, you'd be considered somebody who's offering a sacrificial offering outside of the temple, which, as we saw at the end of the Maaseh HaKarbanos 2 sets of laws ago, there's a whole prohibition against bringing any part of a sacrificial service outside of the temple. These last 3 applications, even if they're not in the main atonement, but they're part of the atonement. And if you would do them outside, you'd be held liable as somebody who brings blood outside. Halacha Zayin, a very unusual case. Haya mazeh. A Kohen was sprinkling blood on the altar. V'nikte o yodeh shel mazeh kodim she'yagi adam la'aver ha'mizbeach. Before, let's consider this picture here. Okay, so he splashes the blood. Before the blood reaches the airspace of the altar, the Kohen's hand gets cut off. Le'osa le'hazoya. The sprinkling doesn't count because it has to come from your hand. And at the point that it reached the mizbeach, your hand was no longer there. Halacha ches, shina matan kronis bechatos. If the Kohen changed the order of the applications on the corners of the sin offering, he didn't do it in the right order. Bein bechatos hanases bifnim, bein bechatos hanases bachut. Whether it's a sin offering which is supposed to be offered, the blood inside in the inner altar or on the outer altar, there's still an order of which to follow, and you didn't follow the order. Nifsal, the sacrifice is disqualified. Aval b'shar kadashim kshedim. Any other sacrifice, it's kosher. The order of the corners doesn't matter so much. Halacha tes nasan hadam min hakeren v'lifnim. If you applied the blood on the inside of the corner, we see over here the Kohen is standing on the outside of the corner. These corners protrude from the top of the mizbeach. If you applied it on the inside, any of those 2 inner walls of the corner, bein bechatas, bein b'shar kadashim, whether we're talking about a sin offering or other sacrifices, bein b'mizbeach hapnimi, bein b'mizbeach hachitzon, or the inner or outer altar, pasul, it's disqualified. Halacha yud, another law relating to blood, is that, as we learned, there was a chut hasikra, there was a red line drawn directly at the midpoint of the height of the mizbeach to demarcate where different sacrifices' blood should be offered. Torah makes it clear that certain sacrifices' blood has to be sprinkled on the top half of the altar. Other bloods have to be sprinkled on the bottom half of the altar. How did they know where was the top and bottom half? This red line. So now what happens, says the Rambam, you have blood in your hand whose mitzvah is to be applied to the top half of the mizbeach. And the Kohen applies it at the bottom half. Or the mitzvah is to put it on the bottom half and the Kohen put it on the top half. And other confusions. The mitzvah was to put it inside the temple structure and you put it on the outer altar. Or it was supposed to be applied to the outer altar, you applied it to the inner altar. Or it was a blood meant to be applied to the outer altar, but you put it in the wrong place, not by the base. Every blood is supposed to be poured at the bottom by the base. You put it on the other side where there was no base. The flesh, the meat of this sacrifice is disqualified. Nevertheless, the owners achieve atonement for this sprinkling. This is, I think, the first time we have such a case. Usually, till now, it was either it's disqualified or it's okay. Here, the meat is disqualified in which it cannot be eaten, but the owners achieve atonement for whatever sprinkling was done. What's the reason? Because since the blood reached the altar, even if it reached not the right place, with regards to atonement, it's as though it reached its proper place. Says the Rambam, when do we say that blood that reached an improper place is fine? If at least the Kohen doing the service was a kosher Kohen. But if a kosher Kohen would have received the blood from the animal's slaughtering and handed it off to somebody like me or you who's not a Kohen and shouldn't really be sprinkling the blood, and the person who was disqualified to do service did a mix-up, he applied he put what was supposed to be on top, on the bottom, inside, outside, outside, inside, or he put it on the ramp in the wrong place where there's no base. So fascinatingly, only if you're kosher can you mess it up. If you're not kosher, you can't mess it up. The meat of the sacrifice doesn't become disqualified. Provided that some of the lifeblood is still pumping out of the animal. A kosher Kohen should quickly go, receive some more of the lifeblood that's pumping, and go sprinkle the blood properly. Because the original person was totally disqualified, so his actions were kind of meaningless. Halacha Yud Aleph, let's consider some other cases of mix-up. Here, not where the Kohen mixed up, but the blood itself got mixed up. You have two sacrificial bloods that got mixed up. Bein dam bedam, bein kaisis bekaisis. Whether it's blood in one cup, or different cups of blood got mixed up. And now you don't know which one is which. And it's a problem because some sacrifices, again, have to be sprinkled one time. Some have to be sprinkled two. Some have to be sprinkled four. Some have to be sprinkled and some have to be poured. So the Rambam says, check which type of sacrifices or blood got mixed up. If both bloods that got mixed up needed to be applied only one time, apply it all once. You cover both. If two sin offerings got mixed up, they both have to be applied 4 times. Apply it all 4 times. But if things that were supposed to be applied once got mixed with blood that was supposed to be applied twice, the 2, which is 4, right, 2 diagonal corners, which basically equals 4 walls, you go with the least. You put it all one application. Why? Because we saw in the beginning of the chapter, 1 is all that counts. As long as you did 1, you're good. If blood that was supposed to be sprinkled on top half got mixed with the bottom half blood, now you're in a problem. Because now there's no least common denominator. Either you're going to put it in the right place or in the wrong place. And all the blood is to be spilled out in the channel of water that ran through the temple courtyard, and the sacrifices are disqualified. Even if leftover remains of the sin offering's blood got mixed up with burnt offering's blood, where anyways everything needs to go down to the bottom half, since at its core, sin offering is a type of offering whose blood is sprinkled on the top half, all should be spilled out to the channel of water, and the sacrifices are disqualified. What if the Kohen didn't ask? He figured, I got mixed up top half and bottom half, let me put part on the top, part on the bottom. He placed from the mixture, a little on top, a little on bottom, kosher. Fascinatingly, sometimes you see, don't ask, just take action. It's kosher what he did. Even if he applied it to the top, part of it. And then he asked the question, hey, maybe I should figure out what to do here. They should guide him to put the rest on the bottom half, and what he did for both top half and bottom half works. If you come to ask to begin with, we say it's all messed up. But if you did part of it or all of it without asking, you're good. Halacha Yud Gimel, nisarvu hanitanin bifnim, banitanin bachutz. If the bloods that got mixed up were, one blood was supposed to be applied inside, it was a type of sin offering, and one blood was supposed to be applied outside, it was a regular offering, burnt offering, peace offering, whatever. Yishafech hakel la'ama, here too, all of it must be spilled out to the water channel, it's garbage. What if the Kohen here too didn't ask a question? And he took the mixture blood and he applied part of it inside and part of it outside. So now it depends. If the blood that was supposed to be sprinkled outside was a regular sacrifice, not a sin offering, then bein shanasan bifnim v'chazar v'nasan b'chutz, ay b'chutz v'chazar v'nasan bifnim hakol kasher. Whatever order you did, this Kohen who didn't ask, whether he first did it inside, then went outside, or went outside, then inside, it's all kosher. But that's only if we're talking about other bloods that were meant to be applied outside, except for a sin offering. But if both bloods were sin offering blood, if you have two bloods from sin offerings, one was a sin offering supposed to be offered outside, one supposed to be offered inside, so here the Kohen who didn't ask and took the mixture both inside and outside, we have to ask him what he did first. If he first applied it outside the Mizbeach and then on the inner altar, that's kosher. But if he would have taken it all inside, started with the inside, then went outside, that's actually disqualified. Because the sin offering has a special law, the one that's supposed to be applied outside. If you bring it into the temple structure, even if it's an individual sin offering, which is going to be eaten anyways, asura, it's forbidden. Shanemar, there's a special verse which says, V'chol chatas asher yuva midama, any sin offering whose blood is brought in to the heichal should not be eaten. V'hu sheyave derech shar heichal. That's provided that it comes in through the gate, through the front. Shanemar yuva, it says it has to be brought in derech bia, on the normal way of entering. If you brought it through a side door, or through a window, or through the roof, nifsal doesn't become disqualified. But therefore you have to ask the Kohen, because if you went first inside, that means he has brought some of the chatas that's supposed to be applied outside, he brought it inside, thereby disqualifying it. So bringing it outside later doesn't help. And the same thing, says the Rambam, applies if we're talking about two levels on the inside. Till now we're talking about a chata supposed to be applied on the outside and on the inside. What if there's two levels of inside? For example, par helem musir avodah zara, the bull that's brought when a court makes an erroneous ruling, or the goat that's brought when the court makes an erroneous ruling about idol worship. Shadamam nichnas laheichal, where anyways their blood is supposed to go inside the temple structure, but your mistake was in michnise lekodesh hakadashim. The Kohen brings it in even deeper than where it's supposed to go, into the Holy of Holies, nifsal, that also becomes disqualified. Shebamakim zeh pnima shel nekaymanhu, because that place relative to that sacrifice is further in than where it's supposed to be. And the same way the chatas, if it's supposed to be brought outside, you bring it inside, you make it disqualified. If it's supposed to be brought inside, you bring it even further inside, you also disqualify it. Let's go even further. The bull and the goat of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, where their blood is supposed to go into the Holy of Holies, if you brought their blood in properly to the Holy of Holies, and sprinkled it, and took it out to the Heichal, the outer chamber, the holy chamber, if you brought it back in, it's no longer supposed to go back in, it's supposed to stay in the holy and be applied over there. At that point, the Kodesh HaKadoshim becomes too deep in for it. If you bring it back in, you disqualify it. You don't even finish the later sprinkles that are going to be done again in the Holy of Holies. Once it goes out, it goes out. If you finished all the sprinkles in the Holy of Holies, took it out to the Heichal, you sprinkled part of the sprinkles that are supposed to be done in the Heichal, took them out of the Heichal, and you brought it back into the Heichal, you can no longer finish the ones that are supposed to be done in the Heichal. Once the blood goes out of its place, disqualified. Sin offering was slaughtered. To begin with, you received its blood in 2 cups, not in one. And one of them ends up outside temple premises. The one that remained inside is still kosher. You can sprinkle from it. But once you bring one of them into the heichal, where they weren't supposed to go, and sprinkle them there, even the cup which remains outside is disqualified, because it says, asher yuva midama, even if of its blood, part of its blood was brought in. Even part of its blood, if it's brought inside, to achieve atonement in the holy area, disqualified. You took blood of a chatas inside to do atonement, which is forbidden if you would do it, but you didn't do it. Took it right out, you didn't sprinkle anything inside. If you brought it in inadvertently, you're good. Take it back out, sprinkle it outside, because you didn't do any atonement in the holy area. If you brought it in purposely, even if you didn't do anything inside there, disqualified. If you brought the actual animal inside, the flesh, the meat, that's kosher. Because it says, the problem is to bring the blood in. But not the flesh. You have a sin offering, which is a bird. After you slaughtered it, it convulsed, it moved around, and it went into the heichal. That's kosher. It's only the blood, not a bird. If you brought in the blood of a bird sin offering, not in a cup, but in its neck, part of the mitzvah, as we saw in the laws of Ma'aseh HaKarbanos, when you have a chatas bird, you're supposed to take the blood as it is in the bird and you apply it to the altar. So here the blood is sitting in the neck. Is that considered in a utensil or not? It's a doubt whether the neck is considered as a utensil. You have the blood of a sin offering bird which spilled out of the bird and you gathered it up. Now it's a doubt if this utensil could disqualify its blood or not. Therefore it should be burnt. Like any bird sin offering out of doubt, we always just burn it, we don't eat it. Consider the following scenario. You have a carbon chatas. It's supposed to be applied to all four corners. You, instead of receiving it in one utensil, received it in four different utensils. And the Kohen applied one application from each cup. The leftover blood in all four of them is to be poured at the base, as is done with every chatas. As it says, you pour all of its blood, the remaining blood, onto the altar. But if in the end you only used one cup to apply all four applications, what remains in that cup indeed goes onto the yesod, onto the base. The other cups, since they were never even used in any application, they're just poured out to the garbage. Let's talk about not mixtures of different bloods together, but blood with other liquids. Blood of a sacrifice falls into water, or falls into unholy blood. You shouldn't sprinkle from it. If you did, it's also disqualified. If it wasn't the blood fell into the water fell into the blood. The blood is sitting in the holy cup, water falls in. If it still looks like blood, kosher. If wine or unholy blood fell inside, now you can't check the look, they're all the same color. We check the quantity that fell in and we evaluate it. What would happen if it was water? If the equivalent amount of water would have fallen in, would it cancel out the appearance of blood in the utensil? You shouldn't sprinkle from it. If they're not that big of a quantity enough to cancel the look, then you can sprinkle from this blood, which wine or other blood fell into. Sacrificial blood got mixed with the blood of another sacrifice, which is disqualified for the altar. Or with blood of a sacrifice which became disqualified during slaughtering. It's all garbage, pour it out. Even if all the cups were offered, besides for one, and you're not sure which one it is, pour it out. And all the sacrifices are disqualified, because there was a mix-up there. If the lifeblood, the first initial spurts, got mixed in with what's called the concentrated blood, the blood that comes out afterwards, that was in the rest of the limbs of the animal, it's also got to be poured out, because only the lifeblood should be sprinkled. If the Kohen didn't ask and he applied it anyways, it's kosher. Chav Daled. Let's talk about some things for the last few halachot that are not blood. The innards of regular sacrifices, the limbs of a burnt offering, the kmitza, the part of the mincha that's usually removed, and the frankincense, or flour offerings that are meant to be burnt after having become consecrated in a vessel. If you threw any of these, like you're supposed to throw blood, instead you threw these stuff onto the fire by hand or by utensil. Bein biyamin, bein bismil, with your right hand or with your left. Harei elu ksherim, it's all kosher. Wine or water which is poured on the altar. Bein bikaira, bein bihin, bein bishar klei asharis ksherim. Doesn't matter what utensil you use. A big bowl, the hin, the largest liquid measuring cup in the temple, other utensils, it's all kosher. Naschan bikli choyle biyadai psulin. But if you use the non-holy vessel or your hand, disqualified. It has to have a kli, it has to have a vessel. Chavav, eivarim shesidran, v'chein kaimetz shesidrai. Usually on the altar there was wood upon which you placed the sacrifices. What if you did the opposite? You set up limbs on the bottom, or the kaimetz, v'sidar ha'etzim shel ma'aracha l'mayla mehem, and you set up the wood of the altar pile on top of them. Or side by side. It's a doubt whether that's the proper way to offer things. So therefore, initially you shouldn't do that, but if you did, this is one of those cases where after the fact, it's okay.